evening show, sponsored by the National Park Service, the League of Women Voters, and a number of organizations listed here on the easel. Climate change is with us. We see it all around, from the melting of the polar ice caps to the warming of our oceans, the changing cycles of drought and flood, and the rising sea levels. We are not here to debate the existence of climate change, but what we are here to do is to talk about what is now evident, what we might expect in the near term, and how we might adjust to our new reality in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The National Park Service, in conjunction with the Madrona Institute and the League of Women Voters, and as I say, the other many groups here in the county, are all thinking about how we can come together as a community to protect our resources and population and to thrive under these new circumstances. With knowledge, we can act. With community, we can do what we need to do, and we can adjust when circumstances make that necessary. Our speaker series this summer, which is entitled The Climate Action Imperative, Understanding Impacts and Making Choices, will help to educate us about the varied aspects of climate change, from the changes in our forests to those in our waters, glaciers, marine life, shorelines, and of course our weather and our food supply. If knowledge is power, then with what we learned during the course of the summer months, we can begin a dialogue about what we should do and will do as a community as we increasingly see the impacts of climate change in our islands. For information about the other speakers in the series, our poster is on bulletin boards and in windows all over the islands, and a schedule is also posted online on the National Park Service website, on the Madrona website, and a number of our other partners in this series. Also, the National Park Service has a new website, really, called Shortwave, and if you would like to be advised personally about the speaker series, who's coming next, etc., you can put your email address on a sign-up sheet on this table in the front, and you'll get a reminder that the next speaker is coming. And now to this evening's presentation. We are very excited to begin our series with a talk from Dr. Richard Hebda, Curator of Botany and Earth History at the Royal British Columbia Museum, and an adjunct professor at the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences in the Department of Biology at the University of Victoria. His talk, entitled At the Tipping Point, A Neighbor's Perspective on Climate Change, Impacts and Adaptation, will give particular emphasis to changes in our forests, which are widely referred to as the lungs of our Earth. While we are a water-oriented county, we have a surprising amount of forested land, which is important to our economy and to our ecology. To the extent that our forest lands are stressed, so too will be much of what we love about our islands. In addition, forests are iconic to the Northwest. Will that iconography continue to be valid? Can trees adjust to the hotter summers, the change in rain patterns, and the new pests or diseases which will attack them as they become more stressed? Here to address these issues and more is Dr. Hebda. He will speak for about an hour, and then we'll open the program to any questions that you have of him. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being concerned about climate change.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank all of you islanders, because we're islanders from just across the water, for coming. And we share this magnificent bioregion here, bigger if you add in the coastal mountains. Sometimes we call it Cascadia, and there's a few independence movement kind of guys. There's even a flag, right? Cascadia flag. And this is really the region of thinking about doing things differently. For example, the Cascadia Green Buildings Institute and the Living Futures initiatives are derived from here. They're looking at certifying buildings and landscapes in terms of their positive contribution to eliminating carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that sort of global initiative is actually starting from Seattle, involving people in Vancouver, architects and all sorts of others. So this is really a center of a different way of thinking about the world we're in. And we really are going to need to think very differently about the way we live because of this enormous change and challenge of climate change. The first thing is, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a beautiful place. My wife and I are already saying, boy, this is just like Salt Spring Island, or this is whatever. We go, we've been here before, but it's just a little different. Well, really, there's just a flag is different, but everything else is fairly much the same. Although, as she said, the roads seem to be cleaner and better condition. So I don't know. You can pay your taxes better or something or other. Anyway. So I'm going to speak for about an hour, but if you have a really burning question, jump in and ask me whatever you want to know. I don't know everything about everything. Because I'm the first speaker, I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to some aspects of climate change. I'm going to talk about the kinds of impacts we might anticipate, both from the basis of models and also on the basis of what has happened in the past, in the fossil record, not so many thousands of years ago here. So we're going to take different ways of looking at climate change impacts, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what to do about it. What can we do? How can we move forward in a way that will help us move into this new reality? We can't go back. That's the first message. We cannot go back to the time that was before, because we've put lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and it's going to be there for quite a long time, many generations into the future, and the world is going to be a warmer place. It's warming and will be a warmer place. So that's a new reality. So we have to think about how to deal with these new challenges and new opportunities. So I titled my presentation "The Tipping Point." I do this on purpose because people perhaps don't appreciate the fact that as you change the atmosphere, you begin to change a whole bunch of things that respond in response to the changing atmospheric conditions. And they will lead to other fundamental changes in Earth processes. And I'm going to talk about some of those, one of which we have crossed already, and others which we are approaching. And when we cross those, it guarantees that there's absolutely no reversibility. People have also talked about 2 degrees Celsius, or about whatever that is, 3.8 degrees Fahrenheit, as a special kind of point, a temperature we should not really cross. Nothing that I see happening in the world today leads me to believe that we're going to avoid that temperature change, which means, in essence, we're committed to crossing a very important threshold. We don't really know what that exactly means, but we have some ideas. So that's why I talk about tipping points. We are really moving beyond sort of, well, maybe things won't change very much and we can kind of stay in the condition we're used to. We are moving to a real new reality. So, and my thing is over here. So let's go forward. Or let's just see what's going on first, and then we'll go forward. Just a few interesting quotes from very famous people in the great US of A. Kerry calls climate change a weapon of mass destruction. Yes, in a sense, but nobody's intentionally wielding it as a weapon. But it is a weapon. It's not a weapon, but it's an agent of mass change. And I think that's really what he was referring to. Yesterday, was it yesterday or the night before, Hillary Clinton was interviewed on national Canadian television, and she had a lot of very thoughtful and pointed things to say about climate change. Among them, one of them was, you know, if we didn't subsidize fossil fuels, they'd be on the same playing field as all the other alternative energies, or if we're going to subsidize fossil fuels, then let's subsidize the other energy. So this is a person who might become, the President of the United States is very thoughtful, very pragmatic about this, but she had some really very forward-looking views and thoughts. Another commentary here is Coke is worried about how it could make more Coca-Cola. Now, maybe we don't need to make more Coke or Pepsi or anything else, but from the business perspective, climate change is a cost. And some businesses may not be able to carry on depending on what resources they need from the globe to create the products that they sell. In some cases, some businesses may benefit from climate change for a bunch of reasons. And then there's another issue I won't get into too much, but then there are those who speculate on the future of foods, for example, because climate change will have negative impacts. They're already anticipating making more money from the fact that there's going to be less food for you to eat. So these are all very deep and important questions we need to consider. The world is warming. First of all, let's get some facts straight. The world is warming and will continue to warm. We've warmed almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit, not quite 1.5, 1.7, depends exactly where we are today. But anyway, the point is, in the last 4 decades, the world has got much warmer, and northern hemisphere has got much, much warmer by several degrees Celsius already, like 2 degrees Celsius, which 2.3, which we're getting over 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That warming has already taken place. So this is not theoretical, this is measured. The temperature graph very clearly demonstrates that over the last 100 years or so, we've warmed markedly. We've warmed probably about 0.8 degrees Celsius, which is, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. You have to forgive me, I learned Fahrenheit, but then I unlearned Fahrenheit when we joined the rest of the world in measuring things in Celsius. And of course, all good scientists also do that. Here's just a look at what's happened in British Columbia between 1900 and 2004 in the winter. The summer hasn't warmed that much, although it's warmed a little bit here. Again, this is degrees Celsius, so more or less multiplied by 2. But winter temperatures have gone up by about 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But in the north, they have gone up by 3 to 3.5 degrees Celsius, which is about, 6 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That has already happened by the year 2004 in northern British Columbia. So these are major, major changes. Changes like this rarely occur in nature unless there's something causing a change. And I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the important features is that it's not so much what the middle is shifting, the middle average temperature is shifting, but the way it's shifting, and this shows it to you. So northern hemisphere land temperatures, this is what it was for the 51 to 1980. 30 years is what we call climate. 1 year is what we call weather. And if you go into the future, or you go into what we've already measured, the middle has shifted. The extreme events here, temperatures, high temperatures, way more of them. They're now 3.8% of the measurements. It's just the point is the whole graph is shifting. Extreme temperatures are, in the last 2 or 3 years, are being recorded 14.1% of the time as opposed to 0.1. So, and it's extremes that are of great concern because hot temperatures kill people. In France a few years ago, 15,000 people were killed by heat. They were older people in unventilated, un-air-conditioned apartments, older ladies, most of them. And I heard just a story. The person, instead of using statistics, told the story of 4 ladies who died because of the heat wave. Because they couldn't cool. They were by themselves, nobody to look after them, and they perished, right? So when you get into this, this is just a measure of the fact that there's way more energy, much higher temperatures. And the same thing, winter temperatures have also increased. So everything is shifting. It's shifting to a warmer state. The key driver is carbon dioxide. There's a wonderful observatory on Mauna Loa where carbon dioxide is measured on a regular basis. And this May, the temperature, or sorry, the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere out in the middle of, away from any source, out in the Hawaiian Islands, crossed 402 parts per million. In 1960, it was only 320 parts per million. This is a huge increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The number is, sure, it's parts per million, but what matters is the relative amount of that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because it's that carbon dioxide that acts to absorb and then re-radiate solar energy and heat the Earth. The thing that struck me is when I looked at that change in carbon dioxide, which is the driver of the increasing energy in the atmosphere, I noted that's the first time that amount of carbon dioxide has exceeded 400 parts per million in 800,000 years, so nearly 1 million years. More important is 28% of the rise is in the last 11 years. So sure, you can say, well, yeah, over 100 and whatever, but the thing is, more than a quarter of it is in the last decade or so. And the rate of increase is increasing, and that's what we're concerned about, is that it's getting rapidly different. And what are the consequences of such things? Well, it's simple. You put more energy in the atmosphere is more energetic. Two things happen. A, you can put a heck of a lot more water into the atmosphere, which means it's going to rain more somewhere, more intensely. And the other thing that means is that there's more wind. Wind is a measure of energy, so there are more intense storms. So it's not just that it's getting warmer, but there's more energy in the atmosphere, and that energy makes the atmosphere more energetic, and we get more extreme damaging events. And so here's an insurance company, one of the big reinsurance companies of the world, Munich Re, and it looked at the comparison of climate-related natural catastrophes versus Earth-related volcanoes and earthquakes. No change in the Earth-related ones, huge increase in the ones there. And if we had that up to date, that number would be even way higher because we've had an additional major catastrophes climatically, globally. So the atmosphere is more energy, and it's more energetic, and it smashes more things, and it rains more. And none of those things are good in terms of the world we live in. Flooding in Europe last year. The Danube has been hitting new highs. Towns are flooding. I could show you more of these pictures. The Prime Minister of Hungary, we are facing the worst floods of all time. You know, these are places where they have 1,000 years of written record. They know what they're talking about. The drought in Texas, or not drought, but the high temperatures in Texas, 2012. And so the air temperature above 6 feet above the surface, a couple of meters. This is all 105 degrees Fahrenheit and hotter. And those are very, very high temperatures, and it's very hard to grow things under those temperatures. And when it's that warm, there's not a lot of moisture because it all gets evaporated into the atmosphere. U.S. drought monitor, April 29th, 2014, California drought, but it's not just California, intense drought, but the Midwest, or southern Midwest, and throughout this region. And again, no water, can't grow things, no water for people to drink, drought emergencies as declared by California. And so, yeah, they get some rain and then they don't get rain again. So this is the state we were in at the end of April in the United States. Much of the Southwest and the South was in a state of drought. Another consequence, and this is very important, I'll talk more about this because it's linked to some very specific atmospheric mechanisms. Arctic sea ice declined by 50% by 2011. People are going, oh my goodness, that's really something to be thinking about and concerned about. And my wife and I know a recently deceased oceanographer who was very concerned about this 10 years ago and talking about what happens? Well, one, that the Arctic sea ice is going to disappear, and what kinds of things does that mean? And I'll show you in a moment how it's linked to the jet stream, and this is new understanding in the last couple of years and how important that is to what's going on. Ignore the title. There is the Arctic sea ice, early 2000s, major decrease, 50%, and then in the year 2012, huge decline in Arctic sea ice. So we're beginning to approach a situation where there will be a summer, probably within the next decade, there will be no Arctic sea ice in the summer at all. And I'm not sure when's the last time that happened, but it's a long, long time ago. Greenland. Only in the 1990s. Most of Greenland was accumulating ice. Very little of it was melting just around the edges. And now, 2005, it's melting all over the edges. And then in the year 2012, all of the Greenland ice sheet, except for a couple of spots, was melting. Now, we couldn't have told this information before, but now we have satellites and we know. And what that means is that in the summer, the entire surface of the Greenland ice sheet is melting. It's warmer than a temperature that will allow it to accumulate ice. It means it's going to lose ice. And once you propagate that warmer temperature at the surface year after year into the ice mass, the whole ice mass begins to warm up from the surface down. So it may not be melting 10 meters down, but it's warming up. And as the surface melts away, the stuff below is warmer than it would have been in the past, and it'll melt even more quickly. So this has the potential to be a runaway situation. And if this really does run away very quickly, then our sea levels are going to go up faster than the models up to date have suggested. In British Columbia, our glaciers are melting. And that's to about the year 2010, and they continue to melt. And I spend a lot of time in the mountains, and you can see this. You can see where the ice used to be, even in 10, 20, 30 years ago, and it's now retreated. Same with the few glaciers you have in the lower 48. Now, that's all sort of landscape, landform, atmosphere stuff, but that temperature, water, all is important to grow food. And when food isn't produced at the rate that it normally has been, the price of food goes up. And so here is the index of food prices since 1991. There's actually a time when it went down from sort of this mean level. This is where we began to grow corn for fuel and not food. The price went way up, and then it kind of went down. This spike here is the consequences of problems in Russia and Australia in the production of wheat. And as we continue to have failed crops or poor crops because of either flooding or drought or heat, the price of food is going to continue to go up. For us, maybe not such a big deal, because food doesn't constitute a big part of our budget, but for people in which food is much of what they need to spend their money on, they go into crisis. And so you get refugees, migration. We already see this from Africa to Europe. And they're willing to die for it as they go across the Mediterranean. So already there are consequences to living people for the changes that are taking place on the globe. Now, for our region, are there any indicators that something is happening? Yes, years ago I began to think, well, if there is climate change, what we could do is look at western red cedar. You have it all over here. We have it on Vancouver Island, because it's the kind of a tree that really can't have too warm and too dry a summer. Its roots are shallow, and it has a hard time getting enough moisture. Even if it's like 2 or 3 weeks of drought, it has a hard time maintaining the tip growth or old branchlets. So here, starting sometime in about the late 1990s, in the early 2000s, we began to see, oops, I got that wrong. I thought it was a laser pointer, but it's not. Let me me just go back to where I was again. I know how to do this. Mike taught me all the right things to do here, except I don't remember where they are.
Here's Mike.
Just put me back onto the... I don't know how I got it to record anything. There we go. So we began to see the die-off of older branchlets of western red cedar, the die-off of the tips of the trees, and this process of the branchlets turning red in August, September, October is called red flagging or flagging. And many trees ended up with big long sticks and just a few branchlets, green scaly leaves at the end. There's been a little bit of a recovery in the later 2000s, and now last year, again, a really major dieback. Last year was a very dry summer. We'll see what happens this year, but I'm willing to bet that there's going to be another very poor situation for the cedars. Some have already died on the east side of Vancouver Island on dry sites. One of the things that I kind of smile at is people love to have cedar hedges, but they don't think what's the environment that cedar likes to grow in, so they'll plant them on 1 foot deep soil over rock. And of course they all die, so they just go to the nursery and say, well, must have been something wrong with that tree, so they plant some more, and they all die. And the guys in the nursery going, come on, keep on coming, we'll just give you all the cedars you want. What that is telling us is that the ecological conditions in our forests, and especially in dry sites, are changing, and they're changing because the climate is changing. So 20 some odd years ago, I thought, well, this would be a really good indicator, cedar, at some time in the future. And then, so I would give a talk about this. If we're looking at climate change, look at the cedars. That's the old canary in the coal mine. 2 or 3 years ago, a couple of the people who I would lecture to or talk to in the museum about this said, you know what, you told us that this might happen sometimes in the future, and it's already happening. I said, yes, it's happening, and it's happening more quickly than I would have anticipated. So that's one of the other lessons here, is that the changes, nature is more sensitive than we imagine from our kind of using of models or thinking about these things from a general scientific perspective. So nature and forests are really good indicators. They're very sensitive to the kinds of changes that are happening in the atmosphere. So that's one indicator. Another indicator is somebody looked at, from the University of British Columbia, looked at how well trees are growing in the forest. And this is to about the mid-2000s. And throughout the entire West, and from Vancouver right down to California and as far away as Colorado, pretty much all of the trees have shown a decline in health and in growth. So this isn't just one little spot here, another spot there. These are changes that are taking place throughout our region. So the trees are talking to us. They're saying, you know what? It's not as good as it used to be. And the difference is linked to the conditions in the atmosphere. Now, some new things we've learned in the last couple of years, done by researchers at Rutgers University. And what we've learned is that the jet stream, you know, that famous jet stream that runs around the northern hemisphere, it's got waves and it does this, and it's the weather bringer for us. When the jet stream's over here, it depends on where you are. It's either wet or dry. If we got a nice big rise in the jet stream like this, you know, it's going to be warm and dry in there. If it's coming down here, especially as it loops down, it's going to be wet. And what's happening, because the Arctic sea ice is not generating as much cold air as it used to, and the difference between the pole and the equator is less than it used to be, the exchange of energy across the mid-latitudes where the jet stream runs, because it's running at the margin of cold and warm air, and that's where the exchange is taking place. The difference is less because the atmosphere is warming overall. The jet stream is moving more slowly. And it's more wobbly. So it's not as strong. It's slower and wobblier. And that was a concept proposed and now measured to be the case. And when that happens, there are consequences. So there you go. There's the pole. Cold air coming down. Warm air coming here. They battle it out along the jet stream. If there's a big gradient, it whips along there nicely, and we get the predictable patterns and seasons and behavior that we're used to. And where the warm air comes in here like this, you get nice conditions. You get wet conditions. In here, you get rain. Where the jet stream swoops down like this, you get dry and settled conditions. Now what's happening is, because the jet stream is moving more slowly, the dry and settled conditions stay longer, and the wet and unsettled conditions stay longer in the place where the jet stream is doing its up or down. It means it rains longer and heavier, or it's drier and hotter for longer. And so we get extreme climatic conditions. And so big floods in England. Why? Because the jet stream swooping up over that particular area sits there in that position, bringing damp, warm air and rain. And so we get floods in Britain, as we did earlier this year. So not a strong cold generation because of sea ice in the north, means changes in the jet stream, means we get extreme weather. And that's exactly what's happening. So sea ice decline may be slowing the jet stream, leading to longer transit time of air masses and weather systems, increased jet stream waviness, more southern and northern swooping of the track, more extreme weather. We didn't know this until 2 or 3 years ago. Imagine that. And now we're beginning to look at this phenomenon. All about energy being transferred in the atmosphere. Now, a couple of things. So I told you the changes that are happening, the nature of the changes, the mechanisms of the changes. Now a little bit about what we know from the past. In the Pliocene, 2 to 5 million years ago, that's before the Ice Age, Arctic temperatures were 34 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than today at 390 parts per million. We're over 400. Why isn't it like that in the Arctic right now? Because the atmosphere is catching up. We're far behind the equilibrium conditions for the amount of energy in the atmosphere. We're just beginning to adjust to the new reality of more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. At equilibrium, at this amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there would be forests on Ellesmere Island in northern Canada. So, maybe that's where we're going to end up if we stay at 400 degrees. Second one, sea levels at 1 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer. We're already almost at 1. We're probably going to hit 2. We're 5 to 7 meters higher during the last time between glacial episodes, so 120,000 years ago. Not 1 meter, which is what everybody's predicting, but higher. And the reason is that probably, and I don't know for sure, but the Greenland ice sheet must have been very small at that time, and most of that ice in the Greenland ice sheet was in the ocean, and therefore it stood higher. So what we see and what we're predicting is underestimating the actual geological reality of the past. Very important to know that. And the last one is, again, sobering. The impacts, the consequences of this amount of energy in the atmosphere are lagging the amount of energy in the atmosphere. So, in other words, the future, regardless of what we do right now, even if we stayed where we are, is going to be significantly different than today. And here's just an indicator of the relationship between carbon dioxide conditions, that's where we are now, and temperature. The two in the past have tracked each other very closely. Right now, they aren't tracking each other closely, but temperature eventually is going to have to catch up to these higher carbon dioxide concentrations. What I'm trying to tell you is, we're at the beginning of something, the end point of which we're not certain what it's going to be, but it's going to be much more than we see today, and the global system is much more sensitive than we think in our models. So we're under-anticipating what the future may be like. Tipping points. There's a bunch of different things that go on in the atmosphere, in the oceans, that are connected. The Greenland ice sheet is connected to summer Arctic sea ice extent, to permafrost in Siberia, to alpine glaciers, to the, I won't explain this, but this is the way the oceans circulate, and to the West Antarctic ice sheet. Different temperatures impact these processes. And here is where we are. We are now committed to at least 1.1 degrees Celsius, no matter what we do. Even if we reduced our CO2 emissions to 0, we're going to end up this warm. The sea ice, we've crossed the threshold. The estimate is that we crossed that threshold of whether there is going to be sea ice, a time with no sea ice around the year 2007. We've already crossed that. The other difficult points for us, or important points, are melting of Russian permafrost and the Greenland ice sheet, and those are estimated to reach a point tipping points around 1.5 degrees Celsius. Then there are these others which are much more distant in temperature. The point is that this one has been, the summer Arctic sea ice has crossed, the next two are on the way. And if we don't do something soon, we're going to cross those. And what I said at the beginning is, unless there's some huge revolution in human thinking and behavior, we're going to cross those two. What that means, I don't know. But they are key global process thresholds. So what do we know from famous scientists? The other thing is that if you want to know more about all of these kinds of things, go to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Remember, 4 letters, IPCC. It'll take you there. The greatest scientific collective effort ever in human history. And we know that these major changes are likely. It's going to get warmer, there are going to be more extremes, and sea levels are going to rise, period. This is important to be aware of, because you then have to put your mind into, okay, we are moving to a different world. What's that world might be like? What might it look like in the future when we get there? How do we even know when we're moving at the rate at which we're going? I'm going to ignore this because you can't see it. It's just people have begun to look at not 100 years into the future, because this doesn't stop 100 years into the future. It goes 200 years into the future. That's not that far away. What's it going to be like then? And so people are asking this question. Well, you know, even if we were concerned about 100 years, but that's not going to be the end of it. It's just what we've chosen as an arbitrary timeline. What about the year 2200? And the changes are very, very significant. So the warming of the Earth by 11 degrees Celsius on average, which is an enormous change. We haven't probably been that warm for 50 million years. And it was a very different world. So people are beginning to ask these questions. Much more water. Note, each degree of warming Celsius adds 7% more water vapor to the atmosphere. If it goes up, what does it have to do? Come down. And what does that mean? Rain. Usually more of it, faster, and therefore floods. And it doesn't rain evenly over the entire atmosphere. It rains in certain places. In Toronto last summer, there was one little thunderstorm that just passed over one little part of town. But it dropped so much rain, nothing could handle it. It filled the sewers, it filled everybody's basements, only in one part of town, because the rainfall was so intense, just in a little thunder cell. So it could be over there, but not over here. Okay, So what do we know about what we think in our region is going to happen as temperatures go, as the carbon dioxide concentrations go up? Well, first of all, here's a look at 1961 to 1990. Remember, 30 years for climate, to 2041 to 2070. Temperature change. And so the question is, are we going to see significant changes in less than 50 years? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're probably going to see how this goes from orange and yellow to red and orange and much less yellow or not very much blue. Essentially, we're looking at 2 to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warming in Washington State, here, and in British Columbia for mean annual temperatures. Yeah, it's moved too. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting by that. Well, you know, I mean, we're a quiet colonizing power. We're here to make sure you all vote for, you know, middle of the road parties and believe in collaboration and less conflict, although we sway back and forth in the way we deal with things. We're just a kind of gentle, not very aggressive people, but, you know, eventually you'll see our way. The winters will be wetter and the summers will be drier, and you can see where the drought area that's developing into the future. And again, we're looking 40, 50 years into the future, and it's our little window here. So it's already dry. You got water supply problems, I know that. Well, they'll be more intense. So water conservation, folks, it's a no-brainer. Growing degree days. This is a really good story. Longer summers, gentler springs, gentler falls, not so much frost. You can grow things longer. And we have a model, I don't have it here, but by the end of the century, we could be commercially growing oranges and lemons and other such things that now grow in the Central Valley of California. And that's a very realistic situation. So big changes in what future agricultural productivity might be if we save the agricultural land and not cover it in houses. Lower mainland of British Columbia, what are we doing? Covering it in houses. But it's going to be ideal agricultural lands not too far into the future. We already grow tons of palm trees in Victoria. When I moved there in 1980, they said, oh yeah, there's 1 or 2 and they're in Beacon Hill Park, and every once in a while the frost kills them off. They've stopped counting at 15,000 now, and they're growing everywhere. So that change has already taken place. Just a tiny little shift, but that's enough to make a difference. So growing degree days points to a real opportunities and possibilities in the agricultural sector in our area. Ecological systems. This is looking at what ecological systems would be like in, I think it's about 70 years. No, well, I forgot the date. The date got clipped, or it's on there and you can't see it. The point is, within the century, if ecological systems came into equilibrium with the climate of the future, you would see prairies, for example, here, shifting such that you would get prairies as far north as the Canadian Northwest Territories. Now, if you told somebody in Canada they're going to have prairies in the Northwest Territories, they'd say, you're nuts. Rate goes down to minus 50 and cold, and there's no way you're going to have that going on. Mountain ecosystems dramatically changed. Coastal ecosystems dramatically changed. All kinds of new ecosystems arising. And this is not an extreme model. This is for sort of average predicted changes. Now, it won't happen this way because nature doesn't work exactly this way, but this is an indicator of the degree of ecological change that we can expect, the reorganization of forest ecosystems and non-forested ecosystems. One thing for sure is non-forest ecosystems will expand in, for example, the mid part of Washington State and southern British Columbia. And here's a model that kind of shows this for you. Several different models, but if you start over here and you look into here, you'll see how much more red there is. Red is the climate of grasslands. That is a great future for grassland ecosystems if that's what you're interested in. More drier ecosystems on the east side of Vancouver Island and in San Juan Islands here. Major changes from the conditions at this time and into the future compared to the present. Tree lines will be higher. That's just natural. The warmer it is, the further south you go, tree lines are higher. So you're going to lose alpine ecosystems, but you're going to gain forested landscapes at higher elevations. Wetlands, very, very sensitive to the balance of water in the summertime. The more the water table is drawn down in the summer, even if it goes to the same position in the winter, that drawdown changes the nature of the species that can grow there. And you'll end up, instead of bogs, of which we have a lot in British Columbia, and you have on the west side of the Olympic Peninsula, and even around here, we're going to have marshes instead. Different hydrological conditions, different wetland ecosystems, of course, different birds, all sorts of different situations there. Fires. It's very, very clear. The longer, warmer summers are going to lead to more fires. And in Canada, in the boreal forest, that's already happened. There are more fires. Lightning strikes hit, they're more likely to ignite a forest fire, and the fire will burn longer and further. And the models show this, and reality shows this. This is already happening. So there's something we have to think about, is how we're going to deal with fires in a situation where the likelihood of them is going up. And there's a lot of good work being done on this. It's fireproofing your property, fireproofing the area around your cities. In British Columbia, we had a very catastrophic fire near Kelowna. Many houses burnt down, so they've started to fireproof the surrounding area by opening up the forests. The trees are still there, but they limb them up so that if a fire gets started through carelessness or otherwise, the fire won't go up into the crown and you won't have a catastrophic fire. So there's an adaptation action that you can take. We know a lot of what I was talking about comes from models, looking at, what are the conditions now, what is the behavior of ecology, of ecological processes of species, and what might they be at these warmer temperatures. We can actually go back into the past, and that's my research area, and look at a time when it in fact was a little bit warmer, about 8,000 years ago, because there was more solar energy reaching the Earth. It had to do with the relationship of the Earth to the Sun. Had nothing to do with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And these are natural fluctuations. They occur all of the time, and the ice ages are linked to them, for example. Ice advances. So we can go into the past and ask, well, what's it like when the climates are different? And how do different species and ecosystems respond, or forests respond to these different conditions? And we do this by looking at fossils. In this case, Victoria dug out a lake to expand its landfill, and we were able to study the deposits. At the top is the present day, the surface of the bottom of the lake. This is the eruption of Crater Lake, known as the Mount Mazama ash, 6,900, 7,000 years ago, and there is the cold time of the Ice Age, about 13,000 years ago. And we can look at pieces of tree, pieces of cones, pieces of insects, or pollen grains, which is what I look at, and essentially reconstruct the past and link it to past climatic events. So 13,000 years ago, this entire coast is covered by this open pine woodland. The climate is cool and dry. What's the first lesson from this? The first lesson is, if the climate is different, you have different trees, different ecosystems, different forests, right? But a lot of people don't think about this. If you change the climate, you fundamentally change your landscape. You change the species that grow there because they all have different tolerances, basic ecology. 12,000 years ago, did you know that we had bison roaming around here? Orcas Island. Not only bison, but can you imagine there were giant ground sloths on Orcas Island after the ice went away? I'd love to meet one. because their heads would be way up there, you know. Being a kid, I have this image in my mind of being on the second floor in a building with a ground sloth looking through the window at me. Because it's, you know, 5 meters high or whatever it is. And you ever see ground sloth dung? Big round balls of sticks like this. How do we know this? Because they found them in caves in New Mexico and places like that. You handle them, they're like bowling balls because they're very light. Fascinating. You can figure out everything they ate because it's all there, mostly. In any case, under this different climatic regime, we didn't only have different ecosystems and forests, but we had completely different kinds of animals, including giant bison. And those bison are now extinct. And they became extinct in part, if not in large part, to climatic conditions that changed. I'm almost there. I just wanted to point out our landscape was probably covered in aspens. East side of Vancouver Island, this area too. So it was more like a prairie landscape. Warmer, drier, bison, different conditions, different climate. Around 10,900 years ago, there was a sudden cooling associated with an event in the North Atlantic, as far as anybody understands it. We don't really understand this well. But the cooling came very quickly. Within a few decades, it reorganized global ecosystems, at least northern ecosystems. And where do big animals that depend on large ecosystem areas go when their nearest home territory and food is now 500 kilometers away? They don't go there. They can't get there. They can't adapt. You can't evolve within a lifetime. So in large part, many of these large creatures, mammoths, mastodons, bison, sloth, became extinct because of rapid climate change. So that's another lesson. Different climates, different ecosystems, different distribution of species, rapid changes, extinction. Many things just can't adapt to very rapid changes. 10,000 years ago, the globe warms up. Our region warms up. We see Douglas fir. So that's not that different from what it is today, except that it actually got warmer slightly and drier in the summers than today. So where we see Douglas fir forests, like around here or the east side of Vancouver Island, we had meadows, we had grasslands, camas, and many of the wildflowers that are familiar to you in your dry balls around here, in the prairies, as you call them, were widespread throughout the San Juan and Gulf Islands, east side of Vancouver Island, up into the areas where there are forests today. Warmer, drier climates mean less forest cover, more open terrain, because there's not enough moisture on shallow soils in really dry sites to support trees. Oaks arrived around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. We don't know exactly why or how. Maybe drifted in on a log, maybe blown in on the mouth of a Steller's jay, I'm joking, brought in by First Nations people. And once they got here, they became widely established and grew over a much greater area than they do today, including well inland on Vancouver Island. They would have been much more abundant in this region at that time. It was a little bit warmer than it is today, probably not much drier. And these are just some of the things I look at, just to remind me. These are spores of bracken fern and charcoal, because fires burned widely at that time. Proof that when the climate is a little bit warmer and drier, fires are more widespread. And here's a picture of a nice fire. Tree lines are high. I told you the predictions say that they would be higher. They, in fact, were higher when it was warmer and drier. Wetlands, in fact, were different. This is not theoretical. Where we had bogs, we had marshes. So the models are verified by actual experience from the fossil record. The distribution of ecosystems, this is based on a bunch of work that I've done in British Columbia, and I didn't take over northern Washington State, with due apologies to our neighbor to the south. This is the condition today. The yellow is grasslands. This was the condition when it was warmer and drier 9,000 years ago. verifying what the models demonstrate through actual evidence. And take a look at, here is our dry zone. Here you are, San Juan Islands over here, Douglas fir. This is the inferred extent of the Douglas fir zone when it was warmer and drier by maybe a degree or so. We don't know exactly, a degree, degree and a half. And look in here, we see the yellow where there were prairies or grasslands. So in fact, the fossil record demonstrates that what the models suggest might happen actually happened only a few thousand years ago when we had the same configuration of land and sea and everything else. So the experiment was run, and the experiment demonstrates that models, in fact, are pretty good indicators of what happens. The current climatic regime, minus the little bit of warming we've just had, arrived around 4,000 years ago, and that's exactly when western red cedar spread through our forests and became a major component of our forested ecosystems. So the fossil record tells us that under the current regime, cedar's okay, but if you warm it up just a little bit and dry out the summers, it's going to go. So it verifies what we see in the passing of cedars. The drying out of cedars, the red flagging, is exactly what one might anticipate in the near future. Bogs developed and spread, replacing marshes at 4,000 years ago, just exactly as would be predicted. One little thing, we dug up a whole bunch of old Douglas fir trees. They were preserved, pickled, if you can imagine, in the bottom of this lake where the landfill was. Some of them going back as far as 9,000 years old. But we were able to get enough of them that we could match the tree rings going back to more than 4,000 years ago. And in that entire 4,200 or so year record, there was one singular event right there. A consistent growth, a pattern before that, within 3 to 10 years, a completely different pattern of growth. And we have this from several different trees, 11 or 12 of them. So really, really good evidence. This suggests, and we know this climate changed in other parts of the northern hemisphere at this time, that when this change took place, these trees recorded it, and they recorded it happening in a decade or less. So when we went from one climatic state, the fat rings on to the left, to the narrower climatic conditions afterwards, the change took place in a decade. Not gradually over 100 or 200 years, but very rapidly. And this was a minor adjustment in northern hemisphere climate. And then people came onto the landscape, and these are the First Nations elders, and these are the two ladies, both sadly passed, who provided the information in the Saanich ethnobotany book that's available there. And then we end up with the forests as we know them today. So the forests as we know them today have a long history. In some areas, replacing areas that had no forest. What it demonstrates is that climate controls the distribution of species, influence the character of ecosystems, and that those changes can happen from one ecosystem type to another forest ecosystem very quickly. And finally, to add the final punctuation point, we come. And what do? We bring everything we think is precious and dear, but really isn't precious and dear to the landscape to which we bring it, among them broom, which was brought to Vancouver Island by some homesick Scotsman. John Muir and his neighbour, Captain Grant. And Captain Grant then beat a hasty retreat, leaving the broom behind. Now, there is no room for broom. Invasive species are a real challenge to our ecosystems because some find niches that weren't there and compete successfully with our native species and begin to break apart the fabric that thousands of years has developed. So broom is one. And once they come in, it's hard to beat it back and fix it, as a bunch of you probably know. And now we have a more recent invader, Daphne is not the name of a beautiful woman. It is the name of a pernicious and evil shrub that's even more difficult to deal with broom because it goes into the woods. Have you been into the woods today? Have you pulled out your Daphne plant? You could control Daphne on an island this size if you really put your mind to it, and you should, because it is a transformer. Go to some places on southern Vancouver Island near Royal Roads University, and it is nothing but Daphne in the understory. The Salal's gone, it's all Daphne. And thousands of seedlings. My son tried to clean up one lady's property. It was just, and we were helping with hands and knees, pull them out, pull them out, pull them out. So not only do we challenge our forest ecosystems with changing climates, but we're challenging them with species they've never seen before, which can find niches and transform them from within. So it's not just climate change, it's human-generated ecological change, all working together. So what can we do about this? It's time to go on a carbon diet. Not carbohydrate diet, although that is a carbon diet. We have to stop using fossil fuels, or if we can, at least dramatically reduce their use. And we have to stop eating nature. And we have a really bad habit of converting natural ecosystems to whatever ideas we might have. Some of them drive the economy and are important in terms of agriculture, and some of them we just whack down the forest because we can make a bunch of money on that forest then and there without thinking of the consequences 50 or 100 years down the line. Forests, trees, are the one guaranteed way we have of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Those little green leaves there, those little photosynthetic organisms, for nothing, are taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere and at least dampening the consequences of our activities in terms of releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we must stop destroying natural ecosystems, and I'll go beyond that. First of all, reducing emissions. You all know. People say, you got to tell the government to stop this or stop the industry from doing this. You turn the key on your car. I turn the key on my car. I heat my house. I keep it at whatever temperature. I am the emitter. They provide me with the drug of carbon to commit my, intoxicated practices of using it, but I'm the one who uses it. I'm the addicted one. We're all addicted. So we can stop that by using less carbon, period. But there are other things that are straightforward that we can do. We can switch our energy sources. Of course, we can't all of a sudden stop emitting CO2 and not use fossil fuels, but there's an order of fossil fuels. Coal is the worst, by far. Natural gas, half the emissions for the same amount of energy. Solar is minuscule, 1/20th the CO2 emissions to set up and run a solar system. Nuclear, we understand nuclear is a problem, but it's even less. Wind, here, hydroelectric, almost nothing. Just by changing the source of energy for our energy requirements, we can make dramatic impacts. The United States uses something like 40% of its energy is generated from coal, 42%. China, huge amounts. Simply by not using coal, or by not using electricity even, no matter what its source is, because you're on a grid. If you don't use it, that's less energy demanded, less coal being burned, because that coal is the backfill for whatever extra energy is required. So just by changing energy, we can make a big difference. Here, as an example, the cost of photovoltaics gone way down. So it's now accessible to get energy from other sources that are not emitting carbon dioxide. This is what Hillary Clinton was talking about. Why subsidize coal? You should be subsidizing photovoltaics and solar. or not subsidize the other to the disadvantage of the first one. And here's just a general look at how the use of photovoltaics has dramatically increased, particularly in Europe, because Europe is rapidly and dramatically adapting to the new reality, reducing CO2 emissions, alternate energy sources. And now they have a better reason. The Russians will turn the power off, the natural gas off to them because of the Ukraine, right? So there are things we can do and still maintain our lifestyle by switching energy sources. What I'd like to talk more about is fostering nature. Okay, so I got to keep moving here. Foster nature, increase the resilience and capacity of nature. Protect the forests, keep the big trees. Something that's been recently discovered, and that is that people used to say old trees are like old people. They're not as energetic. They're not as useful or good or whatever at doing carbon sequestration. The answer is, in fact, they're very, very good at it. When you mass them in a dense stand of old-growth trees, they're individually not as, they're collectively not as good, but the individual trees are better than young trees. And they've looked at like 400 species of trees around the world. Old-growth trees are good. So they're good at taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere, but the other thing about them is they're storing masses of carbon in their trunks. And this is the research forest at the University of Washington, somewhere by Seattle. So protect and foster forests. Very important. And every tree matters, because the second major source of CO2 emissions is deforestation, mostly in the tropics, but everywhere else. Major problem is that those forests have biodiversity, they control hydrology, they influence ecological processes, and all of those values are lost when you do that. We must keep our forests, and older forests are best for storing carbon. They may not be collectively the best at sequestering carbon, but because the carbon is already stored in them, you don't lose the carbon by cutting down the trees, by exposing the soil to oxidation. The bacteria turn it back into carbon dioxide. So, and the other thing is photosynthesis. What does it do? It takes what out of the air? Carbon dioxide. And turns it into what? And trees, organic matter. You can bury it in the ground. You can leave it living. It's not in the atmosphere anymore. Guaranteed, man. It's like I got some photosynthesis to sell you, and I ain't leading you to no place where you shouldn't be. Okay, so here is our ideal circumstance, and I'm driving around here on this island, and what do I see? I see a lot of this good stuff, but you got to keep it. Not clean it, not chop it down, and get anything that's young up into this state before the conditions change where you're not going to be able to do it. Because if it gets too warm and too dry, you're not going to get that forest started and growing. So keep what you have. Those old craggy Douglas firs, they'll hang on to life forever. Once they're old, they're cranky and they can hang on like you wouldn't believe. So keep them, and they are dense in their wood content. The other thing is to look at adapting, some things that we could do. And there's a very interesting project called the Assisted Migration Adaptation Trial. What they're doing basically here in British Columbia is they're taking species and genetic stocks from further south and moving them north to see if they're already adapted for growing in those northern places. And that's like many tree species, conifers mainly, and that's because of forest industry, but 15 tree species, 48 sites, spread through Western North America, from Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. They're already thinking ahead. Can we find seed stocks or species that will grow under the current climatic conditions or the future ones, so that we can begin building the forests of the future as we see some of the trees which no longer can survive in the forests. So they're assisting migrations and they're testing it. A very important thing to do. So this is underway in British Columbia. And there are the trial plots in Vernon. Now Vernon's not a great place for a lot of these things because it's hot and dry in the summers. But some things may survive and may be adapted for growing in the forests of that kind. So people are already thinking of these future forests by trying to find the kinds of genetic types of the same species maybe that can replace the ones they may lose. Another thing is a lot of thought is going into keeping what we have, not having to make something new, but keep alive, keep functional, keep integrated things such as Garry Oak ecosystems, which have many species well adapted to warm and dry climates. So here we have an excellent manual now that just came out a couple of years ago, where we brought all the knowledge that we had together on how to restore and how to keep healthy Garry Oak ecosystems. We encourage people to garden with native plants because native plants are already adapted, many of them from the local region, to the climatic conditions, the dry summers that are here. Rather than trying to grow things that need water, grow things that know about drought. And maybe know more deeply about drought than you possibly imagine, because they were here 8,000 years ago when it was even warmer and drier, and may continue to persist and provide ecological structure and integrity. Gardening. We encourage people to rebuild natural ecosystems on their landscapes. Plant trees in their yards, plant trees wherever they can to keep healthy integrated ecosystems and get more trees growing. So we've got a really interesting guide and help here. Nail the aliens. We already talked about them. Ivy, get rid of the ivy. Oh, yeah, ivy's horrible, but Daphne and others, because they disrupt the natural ecosystem, they simplify them. To some extent, they do sequester carbon, but they interfere with the healthy ecosystems, which are the base of ecosystems of the future. Think outside the box. Okay, so you're going to think about, well, maybe I'll just grow Garry Oak. I know they can grow here, so I'll plant one or two. But maybe the future is really, a good way of looking at the future is sea blush. You all know sea blush? Yeah, widespread, beautiful pink flower all around here. It's an annual. Rather than looking at Garry Oaks as an indicator of where the drier ecosystems might be, that's a pretty conservative way of looking at it. If we look at where sea blush grows, and it's a warm climate, dry summer species, it grows over the winter. It's a winter annual mostly. Look at its range way over here. Well, maybe some of these sites in here, way beyond the dry zone here, are sites where we might think about planting Garry Oak trees and other trees adapted to warmer and drier climates. This is a kind of an indicator ahead of time of where the sites specifically are and where the regions where our forests could be changed to adapt. Final message. We have to change the way we interact with our landscape. Humans used to live with what nature provided them. Now we change everything to concrete roads, houses, straighten out things, flatten things that are not flat. We live on the landscape, we terraform it, we transform it. Unfortunately, all of those things we do create a sensitivity to changes in ecological process and to climate change. What we really need to learn to do is to live in our landscape, in our ecosystems, in such a way that the natural processes continue. Like hobbits. Our roofs are green. Our walls are green. Hydrology behaves as it should. The trees are growing everywhere. Carbon is being sequestered in a way you can't. We don't waste areas with giant lawns. We grow food in there because we need the food right close by our front door. So the 0 mile or 100 mile diet or whatever mile diet you want to imagine. But what we've got to make sure we do is we've got to begin to be like the bear, like the fox, like the goose, like the other animal that lives within the constraints and opportunities of the natural landscape, rather than turning it into sky cities or some other science fiction imagination. And where does the food for sky cities come from? Petroleum byproducts or farms? Where does the control of the water, where does the clean water come from? I don't know, in a sky city, where would it come from? You know, I'm thinking of Star Wars, right, you know. It's not going to come from no place. It's got to come from the natural processes and the natural landscapes and oceanscapes in which we live. Hobbits. Change is coming. It's certain. We don't know exactly how it's going to transform the globe. We know in general terms, we know it'll have economic impacts, economic opportunities. It'll have social consequences. We have to reduce our emissions, absolutely, and we have to prepare for the new reality. I hope I've given you a little bit of entertainment and a little bit of insight, and that you can go forth and think about your community in your area in this new reality. And there's lots of things that you can do, and they're positive things. And think about it, there are jobs for lots of people to do many of these things. There's economic opportunities galore. Thank you very much for putting up with me. Lots of questions. We got time for at least 10 minutes of questions.